Hello and welcome to Storybridge. I'm your host, Patti Lucia. In this episode, I speak with esoteric scholar David Ellis about the story of Miss Cleo, a voodoo priestess with whom I shared a rare friendship.
What you want to know about voodoo?
I thought it would be really fun to talk to you about this old dear friend of mine and this interesting relationship that I had with her. So just to give you a little background, all right? Because basically what I learned about voodoo came from my experience with her. I haven't studied it. I didn't really know much about it. And to be honest with you, I'm kind of a white American. I grew up Catholic, so I have been acculturated to be a little fearful of voodoo, and with all the attitudes, all the things that we're taught about the practice. So in 2007, I met the woman formerly known as Miss Cleo. She died in 2016, but in 2007 she walked into my coffee house and we hit it off right away. She was arriving. She was coming to an Equality Florida meeting. She's out. She's a lesbian, and so I didn't know that at the time, but she was coming to this meeting, and we hit it off. We had some interesting things in common. It's very strange. Like, she was a radical in her 20s. I was a radical in my 20s. She was in LA. I was on the East Coast. But there were these interesting parallels in our lives. And because we kind of hit it off right away, we both thought there must be some karmic or some lifetime kind of stuff going on here. We were meant, our paths were meant to connect this lifetime. It's really interesting because she said, when we got to know each other and we just kind of hung out all the time, sipping rum and smoking. She said she had seen me in the cards. Like, she had pulled cards, and she said that I saw you've been showing up in the cards for the last few years. Mm-hmm. And so I knew it wasn't going to be a romantic relationship, but a woman in business or whatever that I was meant to somehow to meet, and we were going to do stuff together, I guess. And that was kind of the beginning of our friendship, which was, I got to be honest, we had kind of a tumultuous friendship. The similarities that we had, were great sometimes, and then, not so great other times. So we bickered like sisters. Like, I was like her younger sister. And it was interesting to see us together because she was like 6'1" and she always wore heels, and I'm 5'1", or she would say 5 foot ha. Like, she wasn't even giving me the 1 inch. And I never wore heels. So what an interesting contrast we had. So and we did some really interesting things together, and it was a real significant time in my life, and she played a significant role. And I think throughout, what's really interesting is she showed up a few months after I opened up my coffee house, and she died a few months before it closed. Now, when she died, I didn't know my coffee house was closing. So I always thought that is really, really interesting. So much more to say, because there's you have a kind of a close friendship with someone who's a voodoo priestess. It's going to have a pretty big impact on her life. Now, she had been called a psychic, and she hated that. She always corrected people. She's not a psychic, but she had worked for that psychic hotline. And she had, and people had gravitated towards her. Like, she did a few commercials for these guys, and people went nuts and she made millions of dollars for these guys. And when they turned out to be crooked, she was, that's when the shit hit the fan, and she was targeted. But she wasn't the one pocketing the money; they were. But she was seen as the, the head of, like the, what do you call it? The figurehead of this particular psychic hotline. So much though to say about this and to kind of unpack. And I just thought it would be so much fun to have a conversation with you about this experience. Yeah.
Okay. So in terms of voodoo, where do you want me to start?
Well, can I tell you about her altar?
Yep. Tell me about her altar.
All right. Well, first of all, Cleo was always, the spirits were always kind of in her ear. And when she would throw cards for people, when she would do tarot or this other deck that she used, she would say, I don't really need the cards, but people need to see it. Like basically my spirits talk to your spirits. And that's kind of where I get my information. But she had her altar always kind of freaked people out when they saw it. So she had, her altar was like, it had 3 tiers, and she had the rum, she had ganja, she had tobacco, cigars. She would have sweets, fruit. And then there were these musical instruments, and she had, and that was something that caught my eye. She had a wax figure, like a figure of a person, with a wick through it. And I think the wick had been lit, but not burned all the way down, just a little bit. And that really caught my eye. And she had a couple of dolls. There were stuffed dolls, and they would kind of freak people out. They were kind of sitting over in the corner, and they had no eyes. And so, the weird, like the things like the wax figure or the dolls with no eyes, we kind of left that alone. Most people didn't ask about that stuff, but that was, that's what her altar looked like. And she taught me a lot. I keep a home altar now. But back then when I started to, I did it in a half-assed way. And, and you can't really do, if you're going to do an altar, you don't do it. It's something you really have to come with respect. And that was one thing that she would say a lot, was that you have to come with respect. If you don't come with respect, you can't expect the spirit world to, they're not going to respect, they're not going to take you seriously because you're not coming with respect. So if you're going to have an altar, you've got to show respect. It shouldn't be dusty. It shouldn't be left abandoned. Your drinks should be fresh. Your food should be fresh. Things should be fresh on it. You have to come with respect. And so, she taught me and others around, like if you're going to have an altar, then you come with respect. And of course, her altar honored like the Orishas, and she's, especially if you're going to honor the Orishas, you can't, you don't fuck around with them. My current altar is like it's for my ancestors. But that was kind of an intro to kind of altar creating with with Cleo.
I think that when you're talking about voodoo, a few definitions need to be made. Okay, so the origin of that particular religion is started back in Africa from years and years and years and years and years and years ago. And I need to make separations. So the Orisha, right? The basically Yoruban gods, right? They're Yoruban. The altar you're describing is distinctively Yoruban. Okay?
Yeah.
Okay, so the original practitioners of that kind of god magic were the Bambara cult and the Como cult. Okay? And so, if you want, I could give you a few references. If you can get your hand on a very old film called Yeelen, Yeelen, Yeelen. right? And the seminal text, when you want to study this stuff, is The Divine Horseman. So that is a book that is worth reading for anybody who's into esoterics. But a lot of people into esoterics, even spiritual masters, don't know it exists. It's a very important book to read.
All right. So can you say a little bit more, like, now, are you saying that this is, these two books are connected with that particular practice that came out of
Yes,
Yoruba? Yeah.
yes. And so a lot of people get confused whenever you're dealing with voodoo, right? Voodoo is the name that is given to the magical practices of the Como cult
Mhm.
that was brought over to the Caribbean and the Western world
Yeah.
and mixed with Roman Catholicism to hide what they were doing. Okay?
Yeah.
That's what voodoo is. Santeria would be the Spanish. So in the French, we call it voodoo or kele, right? And in the Spanish, we call it Santeria. Okay? And so,
Yeah, it's really interesting because she said she had a and her teacher was Haitian. It was an
correct.
old Haitian woman who lived to be 101. But one thing that Cleo said was she said the people, the Mambos, right? The Mambos and the people who practice voodoo, they usually go to a Catholic church. They are practicing Catholics. So her teacher was Catholic.
Okay, so how did the two religions mix? There's nothing new underneath the sun. If I had to say what voodoo would be African witchcraft. But voodoo is to the original form of that practice what witchcraft is to Wicca. Wicca being the religion, you can't say that voodoo is Orishan, right? So it's from the Orisha. Voodoo is the practice of the knowledge of the Orisha. So when you're dealing with voodoo, there are a few things that you have to absolutely take into consideration. You mentioned the word respect. This is not like witchcraft or whatever else where it's an arbitrary thing. You absolutely have to respect the Orisha and the ancestors who are the intermediaries between you and the Orisha. So when the slaves were brought across from Africa through the Middle Passage back in the day, they needed to find a way to practice their religion and still, because let's face it, you're on a plantation, you got like slave masters beating slaves. And so, you know, you can't exactly practice Obia, right?
Right.
You can't practice Obia when the slave master is watching due to the fact that you're going to get killed, okay? So the dynamic is that the slaves don't like the slave master doesn't like the slaves. And so in order to practice your religion freely, you have to find the parts of the religion that your slave master has and mimic it. And that's the association between voodoo and Catholicism. Okay? And so voodoo practitioners worship the land, like shaman in the United States.
Yeah.
The land is called a living land. Okay? They actually say living land.
Yes,
And
of
the name of
course.
the living land is Ife. Ife is the source of all power, right? But we're not talking about the prime creator. The prime creator, what he created was Ife, a place where the gods live, right? And so who are the gods that we're talking about? Okay, and the demigods, as the case may be in voodoo. We're talking about the following kinds of gods. Shango, very important.
Shango. She talked about Shango.
Shango is the, how does one put this? He's kind of like Thor. Obatala, right, is the what you would associate with the prime creator. Baron Samedi is the god of death, so to speak. That's what you would find in New Orleans. Okay? In the Mardi Gras, the guys with the skull-looking things.
Yeah.
Mimicking Baron Samedi is the guy with the skull with the top hat on. Right, that's Baron Samedi. Okay, and these are the figures that you're talking about when you're talking about voodoo.
Yeah, I mean, she talked a lot about Oshun, Yamaya, There's a couple of others, but definitely Chango, Oshun, Yemaya. There was one other that that is escaping me right now. But yeah, she would have aspects for them, things for them on her altar. Yeah.
So the altar is a three-tiered altar,
Mhm.
and represents different aspects of the world as we see it, right?
Okay.
In the voodoo theology. And so, yes, you have to bring offerings to the gods, like the Greeks brought libations,
Mm.
right? And you
Mhm.
have to put them there for the gods. And the gods' offerings are not like, let's put it this way, you couldn't put an Xbox on.
No.
You got to put things that are from the earth that you have cultivated with love and so on towards the gods.
Absolutely. Absolutely. If
To
things
show
you've
them
made
that you
with, that's right.
appreciate their guidance and so on.
Mhm.
And they in turn bless you with communication. So to one extent, Cleo was correct in disparaging ideas that she's just a psychic, because anybody can be a psychic. Not
Yeah.
anybody can be a voodoo priestess.
No. Yeah, there was a big difference. But I think like in Western culture, we have certain boxes we have to put, people in. And so
Mm-mm. Yeah, I agree
she
with
was
you.
put in the psychic box because there's, this psychic hotline would not have been able to capitalize off of her image or anything, or monetize anything about her if they said, oh yeah, she's our voodoo priestess on
One
hand.
of
Call her.
one of the things that really irritates the snot, I'm going to tell you this, Patti.
Oh, for sure.
Now I come from the Caribbean. I've traveled all over the world. I'm telling you this. One of the things that annoys the snot out of esoteric people when it comes to the Western world, people in the West, is the total ignorance of other people's culture. It's like amazing. So if you called a voodoo priestess a psychic, she'll be like, "What? No,
Yeah.
no,
It's so
what are you talking about?"
disrespectful. It's so disrespectful. It really is. But I mean, don't you think, when you think about it, I was doing this documentary that I don't know if this is actually going to make it into the documentary, but I was saying, listen, you have people like Cleo in cultures all over the world, and there are places in the world where people line up to talk to these folks, and they're healers, they're shaman, they're diviners. They are considered the gifted ones, and they are everywhere in the world. But then you come into the West, and if it's not of one of the major religions, then it's really seen as dark, as evil, as all of these kind of attitudes and judgments.
So to be quite honest with you, there is nothing dark about voodoo. What the media has done is I suppose they've done it the same to witchcraft, which is in the Western world as well. There's nothing dark about voodoo. Okay.
Yep.
If you look at if you look at voodoo, it's not different from your American Indian shaman. Okay. So,
but look what we did. Look what we did to them. When honestly, when the West was settled, what was conquered? All of they conquered the indigenous religions, the indigenous spiritual practices, which were very much like what we're talking about here, and their language, because they were imposing another reality that was going to be based in these other religions. And these religions these spiritual practices could not exist side by side with the new reality that was being imprinted on this world. They had to be destroyed, marginalized, demonized, and whatever.
And turned into, can you imagine you're reducing shamanism to a bunch of people who make dream catchers?
Yes.
Like, for real.
Yeah.
I don't.
And I'm gonna tell you this. This is something that I've come to, and I know what you think about this. I think that in our culture, right, that if it cannot be either monetized or controlled, it will be demonized or destroyed. And so you've got these practices. I mean, these are people whose reality faces the spirit world and the unseen world. And so in a way, you've got this overarching kind of system that's functioning, and these folks are functioning in a different system kind of under it. They're not the folks who are going to rent out a storefront and put up a sign. They're not the folks who are going to make it to Oprah. They're not the folks who have tens of thousands or 100,000 followers on YouTube. These are folks who walk quietly. You might see them in their community, they might be in church, whatever. And the people who are meant to find them. But they are not, they don't necessarily mix with this other system. So I think that's how it is in the West. I think that there are, if you go in these different communities, like a lot of my students are Haitian. And, I've gotten to talk to some of them and they're like, oh yeah, this is normal. This is part of their practice. And there are certain people that they know, little mambos that they know in the community, who they know, this is who you go to, if you need something.
I'm trying to track and to answer your point about the demonization of things that cannot be monetized.
Yeah.
Let's look at voodoo for a moment.
Okay.
Now, you had a religion that they wanted to monetize, but you got the American Indian shaman. You couldn't do the same with voodoo because voodoo has been always very secretive. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I have relatives that are into Kele. I've had my experiences with the Kele culture and so on, my relatives and so on. I respect these people at 100% because I have been in the West. I've been into yoga. I've been into, Patti, the kind of roads that I've walked down.
I know.
And I have not met people with more knowledge than these people that I left back.
Yes. They've got the ancient knowledge, the knowledge that has not been watered down, hasn't been altered, hasn't been westernized, hasn't been like it is.
And they're more effective.
And they're more effective. Yeah.
They're more effective than a whole bunch of stuff. I see stuff on the internet and so on. Most of the stuff is nonsense. We both know that it's just marketing and so on.
Yeah.
Right. I've seen stuff on the internet and a lot of it is nonsense. And I left people back in the day, right, who knew more stuff than these people. And this is not to compliment them and so it's just a statement of fact. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And so you couldn't necessarily do the same thing that they did to the American Indians, right? Because honestly speaking, like secrets that they have, these people have a wide knowledge of herbs and plants and so on. So it's not just about the magic and so on. Okay.
Yeah.
And so what happens to a lot of people, and to your point about demonizing certain religions, they figured that the way to monetize it was to put it in mass media, where you see priests biting the heads off chickens and drinking white rum and spitting it on fire and so on.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like,
right, the stuff of horror films. So yes,
like,
that's it.
Nobody does that.
Yeah. Yeah. And, to your point, Cleo herself would often say that they don't write things down. They don't write things down. And I always thought that was really interesting.
I live with these people. I lived with these people every summer. I lived with these people. Okay. So I can pretty much tell you, there's no biting heads off chickens. Come on.
Yeah.
But seriously, people. And by the way, where they got all that stuff from was in Haiti during the reign of a guy called Aristide, leader of Haiti, right? And y'all probably know him by his other name, Papa Doc and Baby Doc.
Yep, Papa Doc and Baby Doc.
And they had an army of bodyguards, or SSU, what we call Special Services Units in the Caribbean, which we call the Toto Makut. Okay. And so the Toto Makut, what they were feared, very much so. Right? Imagine soldiers with black magic. It's like the worst thing ever. Okay.
Now, was Papa Doc and Baby Doc, were they put in power by the United States.
That would be correct, yes.
Yeah. So they were there to control, because Haiti is a fascinating place, and that the history of Haiti, most people don't know
I can
a
condense it right
fraction.
there for you.
Mm.
To sail over to was sort of the liberator of Haiti. I need to point out something to you here. In 1789, they couldn't conquer Haiti.
That's
Okay?
right, they couldn't.
They
That's
couldn't
right.
conquer Haiti. They couldn't conquer them because they made the mistake of picking the wrongest combination of slaves from the wrongest places in Africa to actually put on that island. So they couldn't conquer Haiti. Would you like to know how they gained any kind of victory? Because they still couldn't conquer them. They lured the man onto a ship claiming peace. When he got onto the ship, they arrested him and executed him, hoping that cutting off the head of the snake would break the resistance. And so I want to point out something here to people watching this broadcast. Everywhere in the world, the English and the Europeans could not conquer, suffered long term as a result of it. Ethiopia never conquered. Haiti never conquered.
That's right.
And so this is a kind of spite revenge thing where they put on an economic disadvantage perpetually. This is real talk, and this is real fact.
That's right. And Ethiopia is another very, very special place.
Correct.
A very powerful place. Haiti is a very powerful place. There are, and it is, and Haiti per capita would have been in the 1% in terms of the richest country in the world. It would have, you know what I mean? Like, because of its resources,
Ethiopia as well.
Yeah, and Ethiopia as well. So here you have two countries that did not succumb to the conquerors.
I want to give you guys an anthology of real Black history. And I don't mean Black history as in the guys with the gold chains that are rapping on television. Okay? Black people aren't actually like that. We're not actually like that. The common understanding is not that. So as an example,
well, that is what the Western culture wants to project and monetize as the message for the community. It's not about power. It's not about empowerment at all. But that's you know what I mean? Like, wow, that's
I honestly understand the concept of Black Lives Matter and all that stuff. I get the concept. You wouldn't need a Black Lives Matter movement if these people knew what their actual history and heritage is.
Absolutely.
You wouldn't need a Black Lives Matter movement because everybody would be like, what the hell am I doing with my life? Let me stand up and be more intelligent than everybody around me. That's what would happen. And so absolutely. I need to give you a little bit of an anthology, and I'm going to reference Aikwe Armour's book, 2000 Seasons. Okay? Because if you haven't read the book, you guys probably need to get your hands on a copy and read it. It will give you the correct history, because this man is a storyteller like no other. Aikwe Armour. Okay, so the empires that existed in Africa at the time, where all this religion and stuff comes from, where Cleo's ancestors are. In Ethiopia, as an example, Ethiopia is very interesting. It was never conquered. They didn't even try to conquer Ethiopia, because there were a bunch of intelligent people, really intelligent people living there, who would not sell out. They would not sell out their other their countrymen. Okay, and so what you had was a situation where Ethiopia was a self-sustaining country. You couldn't get people to go against each other in that land. Okay.
Can I ask you a quick question here? No. Do you think that the source of their, unbreakable power was their connection to spirit?
Absolutely, 100%. Without
and could we say the same thing for the Haitian people?
Yes, because they're very much connected to source, their ancestors. the spirit. And that is a very good point you have just made, which I actually did not think about. It is the connection to spirit. When people know where they come from, it's very, 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 very difficult to break them.
It's the ultimate power.
Yeah. Funny enough, the second concept that I would think is the people in Mali, right? The stories of Sunjata, which is basically the patron icon of Mali, right? You know somebody from Mali from around the corner. They would be the black person whose chest is all up in the air and they have not one penny in their pockets because they know where they come from. And knowing where you come from
is the greatest value. That's your value. Not what you have in your pocket, but what you have here.
Need the material stuff does not matter.
Yeah.
Knowing where you come from is most important. And if you know where you come from, you don't actually need, right, to have money, right? You don't need a lot of things because knowing where you come from, the origin of where you come from is very empowering and it makes a difference. Okay. So
this 2000 seasons, you're gonna did you want to say more about that book?
Ayikweyama is a very brilliant author. There are a few authors that I could give you in terms of reading material, because most people tend to think of Africa and African authors in one sense, right? So Ayikweyama would be the one that comes to mind. There's also Chinua Achebe and Wole Soyinka. Okay. And I will tell you about 2000 Seasons. It basically is an anthology of 2000 years of African history condensed into a book, right? And ultimate brilliance, the invasion of of Islam and so on into Africa and so on, and how it changed there, and the Europeans and how they came in and how they changed things. So that's basically what 2000 Seasons is about. Wole Soyinka, Death and the King's Horsemen, is about African chivalry. Okay?
Yeah.
It's about African chivalry. Now, my particular personal experience is the following. So I'm a mixture of Black and what we call indigenous in the Caribbean, right? A lot of people don't know the history of the Caribbean, and I need to give you the history of the Caribbean to understand the influences that are happening there. We call it a melting pot of cultures, and it's literally a melting pot of cultures because it's hot. But anyway, so this is basically how it works, right? You had the indigenous people. A lot of people don't know why the Caribbean was called the Caribbean. There were two sets of indigenous people who lived there. In the Caribbean, that's the islands themselves. There were Arawaks and there were Caribs. Caribs used to eat people, headhunters, cannibals. And so they used to eat the Arawaks. And so it started from South America. The Arawaks jumped on a boat, moved from island to island, running away from Caribs, right? I do believe that at some point in time, what y'all call your American Indians were probably descendants of, they either came off from the north or up that chain, okay? Running
from the same.
Right. So here's the funny thing. He who eats the next person, the place is named after Caribbean.
Wow.
Okay. That's where that word comes from, Caribs. Okay. And so when the Europeans came and they tried to colonize the Caribbean, they tried to make a slave labor force out of Caribs. What are the odds? There's no point in having somebody working for you who's wondering what you taste like. Okay? So they had to enact a genocide of the Caribs because, how are you gonna make a cannibal work on a plantation? Doesn't work. They don't register. That's not my diet. And why would I grow sugarcane and tobacco? And so they had their own challenges. So they went to Africa and they decided to bring slaves across Africa. And they made the mistake of saying, okay, let's get the biggest, strongest Negroes that we can find and they're going to work on the plantation. What? You're going to get Zulus? Zulu warriors.
Yeah. Good luck
or the captured warriors of other tribes to come and work for you. Yeah, they know war. They will fight. And so you bring them down, you have superior weaponry so you can actually control them, right? But that doesn't stop them from fighting and running away.
Mhm.
And so they put them at the north of the Caribbean in places like Jamaica and Haiti, which still retains the aggressiveness.
Mhm.
Okay. And back in the day, they brought slaves across through a passage called the Middle Passage, off of the coast of West Africa to
Right.
the Caribbean. So that Middle Passage was a horrendous trip,
Mhm.
right? Because the slaves were kept below ship and they literally had to defecate and stay in unclean conditions until they got to the ship and they would just hose the ship down, right? But you want to know what that did? It made everybody from the Caribbean resistant to a whole bunch of different kinds of
Yeah.
toxins and illnesses and microbes and shit like that. So,
I want to just interject here now. Cleo used to say, that middle passage. She said, "Don't you find it interesting?" She would just ask these questions sometimes. She would say, "Don't you find it interesting that the path of most hurricanes follow the middle passage?"
correct.
And so she was always connecting, the gods of the air and the ocean and whatever, as this, almost like a cleansing of that path, like a healing of that path. That's kind of almost like what hurricanes do, but like they literally follow, the middle passage, the route of these slave ships.
That is
Most
correct. And
most most hurricanes.
it's the exact route of the sea. It's not just where they went on the Middle Passage. It's where they curled up and
Mhm.
went and deposited slaves. So they brought these big, strapping Negroes who had fight in them,
Mhm.
and that didn't work. So they had to go to different places in West Africa to actually get people who could comply, right? And then they finally found a set of people who would comply, like like I wish I had a mask to show you. I have masks of every culture on earth inside here. But you had the Orisha, you not the Orisha, the Igbo, right? And something along the lines of pygmies. Okay.
Mhm.
They were gathering people, and so they didn't have that much fight in them. They lived in, for want of a better word, bush.
Yeah, the bush
And
people. Yeah.
so they brought them across to the Caribbean and they had an agricultural slant anyway, so that worked. So they deposited them in places like Antigua and Barbados, and which is why people in Barbados are a little bit shorter than the rest of the Caribbean. Okay. So a lot of you have to know where you come from, right?
It's interesting because there are so many, like if you look at, Cleo is Jamaican, and she was extremely tall, and her family was very
Strapping.
tall, and she often talked about the Zulus, and the Zulu. She had a thing for the Zulu tribe, but yeah, her people, her family, her biological family, was really, because she was adopted in America, in illegal adoption in California, but yeah, her biological people were very tall and Jamaicans.
To put it in a less than nice way, people from Jamaica and Haiti and the top part of the Caribbean coming down, the ancestry would probably be Zulu and what something that y'all like to call in the US Mandingo. Okay.
Yeah.
Right. And they were put there because they needed to breed them.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Because whatever offspring came off of them are going to be strong as hell.
Mm-hmm.
As people in the Olympics are finding out from Jamaican track and field.
Yes.
So
yes, indeed.
because they're resistant and they're strong. And coming down the line, you would have Mali, Ghana, some people from Ghana, Mali, and so on. And these people are proud, like you cannot believe. They had an idea of what royalty is. Okay, so they're proud, and you can tell, like places like St. Lucia, places like St. Vincent, places like Guadeloupe, and these areas. These people walk with their head all up in the air, their chest is up, and they know who they are. Lower down in the Caribbean, you would have less people who are coming from more the central parts of Africa, yeah? That's where their origin is. That's where their tribe is. But how many people in the Caribbean know what their tribe is? Because they wouldn't look past, they wouldn't do any genetic test or whatever else as the case may be. So, because there's no such thing in the Caribbean, you have to actually travel outside to see where your blood, where that kind of blood comes from.
That's interesting.
So there are genetic testing facilities that do that, and they could pretty much tell you that some of your blood comes from sub-Saharan, wherever, Africa as an example. So,
you know, Cleo had sickle cell anemia. She inherited from, you know, her mother, you know, her family line. But yeah, she had sickle cell, which is, associated with, with people with African descent. But that disease is actually a very interesting blood condition. So
the origin of sickle cell, we don't know, but we know that it has a social component to it. Something happened, something happened to create that kind of condition. And so this is basically what we can say with regard to that. With regard to the religion and so on, you will notice that, look, people understood where they were coming from. What makes Jamaica a very interesting island is that the spirituality of Jamaicans is not, they don't harp on it. It just is. If you have actually visited that island, the island has a vibration about it that you cannot mistake. So you're not going to hear Jamaicans running up and down the roads talking about spirituality. But then you listen to the music of Bob Marley. Exactly. Which is the epitome of everything that is spiritual, right? He addresses every concepts. And then you look at the athletic performance of Usain Bolt. Yep. You don't produce that kind of stuff in an area where there is no spirituality. Yes, exactly. You don't produce that kind of result in an area where there's no spirituality and there is no sense of self. Okay. Absolutely. Yes, you can say the same thing about that tennis player, Djokovic. Very deeply spiritual people. And I agree. I think that there's a connection, definitely a connection to spirit. It unlocks things. It unlocks our true human potential, I think, when we're deeply connected spiritually, when they are, connected in that way. So yeah, But then let's look at the other side of the fence. Okay, you had people, it doesn't matter whether they're American, Indian. I'm going to use the black population due to the fact that it's easy. When you cut people off from the spirituality, as in what's happening in the United States, look at the representation of what black culture is in the United States. You think it irritates y'all? You think that the Republicans and all those racist people or whatever who have an issue, and I wouldn't equate Republicans with racists, because there are some Republicans that are actually very reasonable people who just have conservative values, right? But in terms of the racism and what the idea that they have in their minds of black people, error, incorrect. Okay, and I say it's incorrect because they're basing it on the black people that they think they know around them, right? And if you think that certain kinds of people may irritate you guys, they irritate us. Okay, it's not a black thing. It's not a black thing. It's a people thing. Okay, it's like you have cultural, spiritual thing. It's a culture. So you have inner city people, right? They're doing stupid shit. They're making songs that have nothing to do with spirituality. So they want to. They have natural rhythm in them, which is spiritual. So even the rap artists and so on with the chains, and they're talking about materialism. I got my bitches and my gold and my cash and stuff like that. Well, basically they've offered up all of this, their humanness to, on the altar of
whatever, the music industry, they've sold their
Correct.
soul. And some of them
Materialism.
will even say, I've sold my soul to the devil, so there's all of
Materialism.
that. Yes,
Materialism is the God that they worship. But even in
absolutely.
that, there is spirituality because I listen to some of their songs and there is natural rhythm in them, which is a function of spirituality, that vibration to express oneself in such a way that it touches another human soul at some level.
Yeah.
So you listen to some of these rap songs, you cannot help but be affected by it.
Yeah.
You find yourself head bobbing to it.
Yeah.
You affect the other person. So in them, there is spirituality. It's an aberrant form of spirituality, however. And I'm going to say this because I'm not woke. I can actually say these things.
Oh, good.
So
Thank God.
I'm not part of classical culture. I'm going to say it is an aberrant form of spirituality.
Yeah.
Because what it does, it puts materialism as the God.
Yep.
And like there was I read an article of a young rapper. He wanted to have a $24 million diamond, sapphire diamond, encrusted into his forehead.
Wow. Over his third eye. Sweet.
It's like
I'm being facetious, but
so I'm like $24 million. Let me ask you a question. How many people could $24 million feed? You just you are sick. You are spiritually sick. When you hear about practices of voodoo and so on in the Caribbean or wherever, do not look at it. I would encourage the listeners and the audience, do not look at it disparagingly. It is because of these practices that you have Black people, especially, or people in the Caribbean and so on, they still have a sense of who they are. My family is into Kele. Part of my family is into Kele. Yeah. Okay. And because of that, I never lost sight of who I was. I always had a sense that I would be, that I'm going to try to be better. I'm going to absorb, because I don't start from the position of all the good things are for the other people.
Yeah.
Like education and stuff like that.
Yeah. From a kind of like a victimized position, which is kind of what has, which is so it is what keeps glorified in American culture. Is who can be the biggest victim here. So we live in a culture honestly, that glorifies victimization.
I hear this. I hear stories like, "Oh, I want to get out of the ghetto, but there's no way getting out of the ghetto." Yeah, there is. Walk out. Walk out into the wilderness like you have a pair, and see where that road takes you.
Yeah.
Don't stay in a place where you will get shot tomorrow, the day after, or the day after that.
Right.
Get up, pack, leave the place. I understand you have no money. Do you know how many people have had no money and refused and decided to leave
and have crossed the ocean, with no money in their pocket? Yeah.
So there's no more Renaissance men anywhere.
Yeah.
There's no more Renaissance men anywhere. So it's like, no, guys, honestly, in terms of the spirituality, and I want to get back to Miss Cleo and what she represents.
Yeah.
Right. I want to say this, right? Because this woman was taken, as you said, in an illegal adoption, right? And she was used, but she still had the idea of who she was, where she came from. And the conversations you had with her tells me just from this podcast that this woman was a real one.
Yeah, she was a real one. Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay. Yeah, she was. And you know what I think, which comes back to those commercials. So this, and I found this out from the folks who were doing the documentary, who did an enormous amount of research, much respect to them. But they said, listen, there were other psychics who worked for that psychic hotline, who did commercials for that psychic hotline without the effect that Cleo had when she did a series of commercials. So when she did a series of commercials, people lost their shit. Like, people needed to talk to her. Folks were stealing credit cards from their parents. I talked to so many young people who at the time, they weren't old enough to have a credit card. So they were going in their parents' wallets and purses. They were getting into big trouble. They had to talk to her. And then of course there were wives taking their husbands' credit cards, whatever. There are people just like, I've got to talk to this woman. And I often, I think about that, and I think about how there was a sense on some level with these people that they knew she was real. And they needed to talk to her. They needed to tell her whatever secret they were holding or walking around in. They needed to tell her their fears. They felt like they could speak to her in a more honest and intimate way than they could speak to perhaps any other psychic they had ever been exposed to or whatever. There was something about her. So when the shit hit the fan, and well, first of all, they would call and they generally didn't get her, right? They got someone else. And on top of it, the company was double charging, triple charging their credit cards. So they didn't get to talk to her, and they were ripped off. And so you have people who were just really angry about that. I met a few who actually, when they met Cleo, they sorted it out and they became fast friends. But it was kind of almost like the level, the kind of betrayal that they were experiencing went beyond, oh, my money was stolen, or, oh, they took my money and I didn't get what I wanted. There was more emotion behind it. So, and I definitely felt like there was a deeper sense of betrayal because the money was the least of it. It was that they needed to talk to her, and they were not able to. They never got a chance to talk to this woman who represented some deeper answers for them. They thought they could get deeper answers. And it wasn't just about, is my boyfriend cheating on me? I think that they felt that they could get much more from her than these psychics that are just a dime a dozen out there. And not to disparage psychics, because I think that they do important work in the scheme of things. But this was very, very different. So I've thought a lot about that. And I thought, why was the response of people so strong? And I think it was because she was real, because she was real. There was a deeper sense of betrayal. And I don't think she had any control over that, unfortunately. But that's kind of my working theory, I think, when people ask me.
When I think about that psychic hotline, I think, how stupid are you? There's a big difference between a psychic and a spiritual counselor.
Mm-hmm. But but think of the time though. There was, there wasn't really, like in the 90s, now it was a very different time. It was what is available to us in terms of spiritual teachers and, different spiritual practices and the books and the things like that. It was a different time. There really wasn't that kind of level of access during that time.
Agreed, but they could have gone down the line of psychic. They must have done. They just wanted a quick buck, clearly, and that was not necessary, because a spiritual counselor, I'm guessing, is a little bit different from a psychic. Psychics will come and read you for 5 minutes. A spiritual counselor will give you some advice as to what roads you should be looking at and how they will impact you long term.
Yeah.
And so the psychic hotline, oh God, my God, that was one of the most damaging events that could have occurred for the esoteric community.
Are you talking about the Miss Cleo scandal?
It's the whole scandal.
The whole,
right?
the whole thing. Yeah. I mean, and but the thing is, another thing about this was how, because I live in Florida now. I didn't live in Florida at the time, but there were political people who were literally making the issue, like bringing Miss Cleo to justice. They were making that part of that. They were making that what they were running on. If you elect me, I'm going to bring Miss Cleo to justice. I mean, like, what was that about? That
there are two things happening there. Number one, pandering to the racism that people have.
Yes.
And xenophobia.
Yeah.
The other aspect of that was pandering to the fear that people have of this kind of weird thing taking over their society and no people not going to priests. So I'm guessing the evangelical community absolutely loved anybody who said that they would go after Miss Cleo. You have to understand the level of ignorance that you are dealing with. Miss Cleo is not the head of a company. Miss Cleo is a person on a commercial. And so you had to have a special level of ignorance. So Miss Cleo became a sort of intersect point.
Scapegoat. I mean, clearly, I think
Yeah,
in
but
some
she's
ways.
valuable as an intersect point of things to punish. Black, sounds foreign, is into weird psychic stuff that is not Christian, right? And she's a woman.
I'm an English teacher, and you're familiar with. Wait, is my microphone is being weird. The Crucible, and the character of Tituba, right? How she was responsible. Now, Tituba was actually from Barbados. Tituba, I believe. She was from Barbados. She had been brought by the family, and then this is kind of like based on a true story. She was a servant of the family when they lived in Barbados, when he was, I guess, I think it was a businessman in Barbados, and then decided to kind of be he wasn't a very successful businessman, but then decided to become a preacher up in Massachusetts. And so they traveled to Massachusetts and brought their servant at the time, Tituba, who was familiar with these practices, which were, very much like voodoo. And she's a really, really interesting character in the Crucible, in terms of like being the one who corrupted these young girls, brought them out into the woods, and had them doing these wicked things that were associated with demons and devils and things like that.
When I learned the Crucible, there were underlying themes there. There were underlying themes, but one of the underlying themes that we're seeing played out in today's society: when in doubt, find the outlier.
Yes.
And demonize and crucify them immediately. And Miss Cleo was that outlier. Back in the day. You have a woman who is Black, who sounds foreign, even though she really isn't, right? And who's into like psychic stuff that is not Christian.
Right.
No, she couldn't live. Every politician would be all over that. Yeah. It didn't matter whether it was. And at the time, to be fair, it wasn't just on one side of the political spectrum or the other side of the political spectrum. They were both bad.
Yeah, exactly. There was this whole thing about, and this is because there was a problem with her birth certificate. That was a whole controversial thing. So basically, they saw that Cleo claimed that she was born in Jamaica and came to the United States. And because her birth certificate says she is from LA, her family's from LA, which I think there was some shenanigans with her birth certificate. So she had 8 brothers, all Jamaican, all, she said, like huge, tall, who were all brought and adopted by the same family, this Jamaican family in LA. And her adoptive mother was a bit like what she called a bandulu, which was like, a little bit of a gangster. She was into all kinds of stuff, and who knows what, but she apparently, the birth certificate was off. But at any rate, when the scandal went down, because the birth certificate said, oh no, she was born in LA, the whole story was that Jamaican accent is a falsehood. It is a fraud. She doesn't have a Jamaican accent. And
do you have any idea how hard it is to imitate Jamaican?
Exactly,
patois?
especially, and I would say people have no idea. As soon as she got a little irritated, she would slip right into patois. And you would be sitting there saying, I really don't know what she's saying. I just know she's upset.
That is one accent in the Caribbean, along with a Solution accent, that you can't fake. You can't fake that stuff at all.
Absolutely.
I've seen people try it. It usually ends badly. Yeah. If you're not born there, you don't absolutely know anything about that.
But this is what was so, and there are people to this day I mean, they're probably gonna see this documentary and say, no, that wasn't a fake accent. Really, I always thought it was a fake accent. Whatever. But like, but I, I think about this, and like when I met her, she was coming out of seclusion, and she was still talking a lot about this experience, and so much of it was so hard to wrap my mind around, because even to this day, I mean, just to imagine that the very sound of your voice it's been all over all newspapers and radio waves and television nationally and internationally, that your accent is a lie. So every time you open your mouth, as soon as people hear your voice, they're assuming that everything that comes out of your mouth at that point is a lie.
I have to say something here.
Holy crap. I mean, talk about
silence. I have to say something here about the news media and how things are done in the United States. It's so nasty and insidious. So nasty and insidious. Let me explain something to you, okay? Just so that we're clear, so that we're not mistaken or anything, and then people are watching this broadcast. When you say that somebody's accent is a lie, what you're doing is totally erasing their credibility for existing,
Exactly.
So if you say that David is not from the Caribbean because he clearly doesn't live there, look, he's in a hoodie, and he's
a Canadian. Why is he making up that accent? I mean, it's not even funny. Yeah,
it's funny. It actually is funny, because I'm like, I see it's so insidious and nasty when people want to erase your existence and your validity.
Yes,
they will take out your accent.
Yes.
Let me explain something so that we're clear. It's like at the last broadcast we did. I'm like, I'm Black. I'm from the Caribbean. Loud and proud. Okay? And as I told you, when the broadcast is over, I'm going to go tan so I can be more Black. Okay? So if you are not from the Caribbean, the funny thing about people from the Caribbean is that they can switch to standard English really quickly, because we learn English in school more than you guys do.
Yep. And that was actually one thing that people they were like, wait a minute, but she can actually speak with an English accent anytime she wants. So, I mean, Cleo went to a boarding school. She went to a boarding school where like diplomats and celebrities' kids went to. She had like a really fun, I mean, her parents sent her there because she was getting into trouble, but they had the money to do it. So she had a really, like she went to like a great school, but she hung out with a wide range of people, got a great education, and could be in all these different kinds of environments.
But she chose to return to where she was. Absolutely. Somebody like that who chooses is not fake.
No,
it's not fake.
Yeah, absolutely. No, she was authentic. And that's what broke our hearts. Like the people who got to know her personally, we became extremely protective of her. Like, we didn't want to speak to if the media wanted to talk to us, fuck them. We don't want to talk to you because of what they had done to our friend. Cleo was absolutely canceled decades before
cancellation was a thing. Yeah.
She was absolutely silenced, because when you say that even the sound of someone's voice is a fraud, you are effectively silencing them, or worse, as you pointed out, you're literally kind of erasing their existence. And that was really, really troubling.
What is the most prolific Black author that you know? Female author?
Zora Neale Hurston. I absolutely love Zora Neale Hurston. She's my favorite. Now, Zora was someone who was marginalized too by other giants in the literary, she died poor, and unknown. She was just discovered.
Understood.
After,
But let's talk about Maya Angelou. She lost the voice.
Yeah, Maya Angelou. I love Maya Angelou.
How much shit did this woman take in her life? Let's
Beloved, Beloved, and yes.
So you have to think in terms of people like Cleo and Maya Angelou, and I'm going to put them both in the same category as two people who shared common backgrounds and heritage, who were absolutely silenced in different ways. And in Maya Angelou's case, it was very literal because she lost her voice for many years after being raped and feeling guilty that she wished the man dead, a white man who raped her, and he died. Let's talk about that for a moment. She wished the man dead, he died, and she went silent. Let's talk about that as an instruction to the power of spirituality. Is there anybody out there right now? I understand that Maya Angelou does not advertise herself as a spiritually aware individual. Is there anybody out there in the audience right now who can actually, with absolute certainty, look at me or Patti and say something along the lines of, Maya Angelou is not spiritual? Really?
Yeah, no way. Yeah.
Right?
Absolutely.
So the power of spirituality has a lot to do with the individual's ability to express themselves. And when you take that, you want to silence her. For everything that comes out of your mouth is a lie, is a negation. It's a revocation of the words that have flown out of the that has flown out of that individual's mouth from the time they begin to speak. You might as well put a gag on them.
Yeah.
Does it really matter whether her accent is real or not? You're killing the accent, you're not killing the message. Deal with the message. Yeah. Which is why I really am a little bit upset with the people who are on that psychic hotline.
Yeah.
Because Miss Cleo could have done a lot of good.
She could
have. For a lot of women in the US if given the opportunity to.
Absolutely. No, she could have, and I think that she did good in her own ways, but it could have been on a grander scale. You know, her contract with these people, you know, one of the things that really upset Cleo right through to the end of her life was the fact that these people owned her name and her likeness for what do they call it? For, yes. And so they own, and the people who did this documentary, God bless them, I think that this was great. When they were interviewing me, the director, Jen Bria, she said, you know, it doesn't seem like Cleo had a lawyer at the time that she signed her contract with these people.
Yes, you can't make, you can't make, no, you can't.
Yeah, she said, because that is not something that anyone would agree to. And I said, yeah, I actually think that she was solo. She was flying solo. She never talked about having legal representation, and she just signed it. She was, I think one of the things she was probably angry about was her own naivete. She did not know who she was dealing with and did not have legal representation and signed a really bad contract.
So Patti, I have been in the esoteric community for a very, very long time. A lot of people don't know how long, let's put it this way, since I was 13 years old.
13 years old, yeah.
So back in the day, the reason why she would have signed that contract is, and I could pretty much get into her mind and tell you, there is, and I'll tell you why, because she had other options. She had enough education to do other options, right?
Yeah.
So I'm going to pretty much tell you why she would have signed that contract.
Okay.
Back in the day, the psychics and so on were getting no airtime anywhere. Okay, that they were conscribed to little backwards little shops and dirty little malls everywhere, right? So I can tell you that she would have signed that contract because she probably thought this was a good thing. Getting the name out there. Yeah. I think she did those commercials, if you ask me, because I could tell you, because it has happened to me as well, not the whole Miss Cleo thing. It has happened to me as well. But you want to put stuff out there.
Yeah.
I am upset when I hear stories like this, because like this network as an example is because I want to put people's stuff out there without that contract and all that exploitative nonsense. So back in the day, you wouldn't have had a voice, right? Unless you signed on to something like this.
Yep.
From exploitative people who would want to put your voice out there, and you're thinking, yeah, okay, this is a good thing.
Yeah, it's like signing on. it's like signing on to a predator loan because you just don't have the credit to get
Anything done.
anything done.
So basically, they were a whole bunch of psychics would have signed on to that. I need to get my name out there. I can help people. Some of them would be saying, I can help people. This is what I'm here for. They would sign on to something like this. But the people who had the money were disgusting.
Yeah.
And they still remain disgusting.
Well, here's the thing. These guys, so it was her name and it was her face on the cover of all of these newspapers and in the news. But you never, like, if you ask, what are the names of the guys who own this company? People don't know their names and they don't know their faces. They did not become household faces or household names.
It
was Cleo's, so you have two white men.
This is insidious.
Two white men who ran this company.
It boggles the mind.
Yeah.
It absolutely boggles the mind, because let me explain something to you so that we understand each other. You have a situation where you have colonization, you have exploitation. Years later, it's the same thing. Mm-hmm. Those white men couldn't be under the cover of the psychic hotline. You want to know why they couldn't be, apart from the nefarious intent? Apart from the nefarious intent, they needed somebody exotic, somebody different.
That's right.
Somebody exotic, somebody with an accent, somebody different, so that people can sign on, because the unknown is so alluring to those that don't know. Yeah. Well, she has an accent, so clearly she knows something I don't know, right?
Yeah, and she was easily exploitable. I agree. And the thing is about like her likeness or whatever, these folks with the documentary was saying, well, do you think there was like, what about her? Like, I said, what they ended up owning is like what you saw on those commercials. Well, actually what it was an amplified version of the real woman. So they just had her amplify it. But did she wear those kind of clothes? Yes, she did. Did she talk like that? Yes, she did. Did she wear head wraps? Yes, she did. She did when she went, to a coffee house to pick up a cup of coffee. Like she actually, dressed like that and always kept her hair, always kept her head covered. So there were, it was just an exaggerated or amplified version of the real woman. And so, you know what I mean?
Dressed like that.
Yeah.
I have relatives who dress like that.
Yeah. It's just, this is how,
there's nothing special about it. Yeah. Where I come from, it's just the way you dress, right? So here's the thing. Wow. Oh God. Like, wow. When I hear these stories of how certain esoteric people, their fate has gone, it really does break the heart.
It does.
Because I've said this is not the first story and it's not going to be the last story, but by far, this is the most well-known story. Mm-hmm. And people need to look beneath the surface and so on. But once you get past your own prejudice and hatred and small-mindedness and narrow-mindedness, and I say this with all confidence, that there are a bunch of people in their ignorance who believe anything that is being said to them in the news media, believe the politicians and believe whatever else, and never take the time to look at people at the human level.
I mean, I honestly think that that I really think it's high time for us to take, and this goes across class lines, race lines, and whatever, religious lines or whatever. We really do need to, if this bringing to the surface this real story of Cleo, does anything, I hope it gives us an opportunity to look at what American or what Western ignorance looks like. And the cost of our ignorance, like the human cost of our own ignorance, and what's it going to take for us to raise our consciousness to a point where where lives like this, that they don't get destroyed, or we don't let the media or these predator companies or whatever destroy the lives of people like Cleo and others. I'd love for that to happen, for this to be an opportunity for people to say, wow, I really misjudged her. I wonder what that was about. Maybe I need to look at my narrow belief systems and reevaluate that. And, I really do. I hope that people, come to that, at least think about it a little bit.
That's going to take a lot of effort.
I know. People don't want to work that hard.
I mean, I had to sigh on that one. Like that's a very good question, and it's going to take a lot of effort because the truth of the matter is, it's easy to be small-minded. It takes
Mm,
absolutely no effort whatsoever. You get your bag of Doritos or Lay's or I don't know what brand of flavor of chips that you're doing. You
mm.
sit down on the couch. You don't even bother to take off your socks. You put your feet up, you got your lays and stuff, and you're eating, and you just ingest hatred from the news media
Yeah.
and whatever's trending on social
Yeah.
media at
Yeah.
whatever
So
time.
your eyes are taking in junk, you're taking in junk,
And
and you're gonna spew
you
junk.
become a rubbish
You
heap
become
after a while.
yeah, that's right.
You
Listen,
become a rubbish heap after a while. You do.
I want to I really want to explore another aspect of this that I think you're
Mhm,
going to find fascinating because you're also a man who is very well versed in the area of psychology.
mhm,
So let me share a little bit about the journey with Cleo that is challenging in another a whole other area. I love talking about all of the things, about our culture and religion and spirituality, but I really want to just kind of put something out there so you can talk about the psychological aspect of this
mhm,
story. So Cleo, if one were to get to know Cleo, have a more intimate relationship with Cleo, right? A friendship or become her lover or whatever, that sooner rather than later, you would meet the spirits who traveled with her. So there were times when Cleo was occupied by other spirits and they had names.
mhm,
And so early on in our friendship, she told me, she said, there are others, there are those who travel with me. Now, there were always spirits traveling with her. For instance, there were always moths around. She had, and we would say, well, there are a lot of moths. And she said, those are the dead, like she always seemed to be surrounded by by spirits. But there were at least three that I knew of who occupied her. One was Gramir, who she often called the old lady. Now, Gramir, she said, is the spirit of her real mother, who was
mhm,
apparently a Mambo in Jamaica.
mhm.
There was Max, was another woman who was a bit of like a sex kitten, um, who Cleo kind of hinted that she may have owned a brothel during the French Revolution era or whatever. But she was a very interesting character. And there was another a male character. I'm just going to call him the tall one because he's a frightening dude and I just don't want to say his name. But definitely a very, very tall, we're going to say fierce warrior Zulu type dude. Yeah. And so I particularly got to know Grimir and Max and loved them, loved spending time with them, loved sitting and drinking rum with them. And to me, they were they were the spirits who occupied Cleo sometimes. They came sometimes they were unexpected. She usually could sense when they were coming or when they were wanting to come in. Max was a bit of an issue for her because Max didn't like the rules of our world, and she loved men, and so she had gotten Cleo into a little trouble now and then, when she was the one present and Cleo was off to the side and she was having her fun with who she wanted to have fun with, and so sometimes created a mess for Cleo to have to clean up when she returned. Um, but they both, like, if you were in an intimate relationship with Cleo, you can imagine neither one, I mean, like, when Gramir occupied Cleo, she wanted nothing to do with sleeping in the bed with Cleo's partner. Like that wasn't going to happen. So when she came, when Gramir came, she would sleep in the other room if she was going to stay for a period of days. And I think Max would do the same thing. So sometimes they would come for a matter of hours, and sometimes they would come for a few days. And you kind of knew, like I could tell. I knew when one or the other was around and Cleo wasn't. Now, there are people who will say, and I've heard someone say, this is textbook multiple personality stuff because she had a traumatic childhood, and we can just chalk it up to this is textbook
Schizophrenia.
Schizophrenia, that sort of thing, multiple personality disorder, schizophrenia.
DID.
Yeah. And so, but if you speak to people in other cultures, this is not psychologized as it is in the West. This is often what happens with people who
channel.
Yes. And so I really just wanted to talk to you about this because it is something that came up, and it is something that's being talked about on the documentary, and very, very few people know this about Cleo. People who were close to Cleo knew this, but in her public life, this was not a commonly known thing. And so I think that people, especially in the West, might have, particular ideas. This kind of goes back to the ignorance of the West kind of thing that we were talking about before. But I'd love to hear what you have to say about this.
I'm going to start this off by saying, did you know that psychology is a pseudoscience?
Yes.
It can't be measured.
Soft science.
Right. Did you know that psychology is a pseudoscience? It's not really a science because you can't measure somebody's illness. Mm-hmm. As an example. So it's not actually part of science, even though it has the ology suffix, which says that it's a study of. Notice it doesn't have a osophy suffix, which means that it's a science of something. Okay, good. So let's start with that. If that pans out, that it's some sort of, they write it off, oh, she was schizophrenic. You know how many schizophrenic people they have running around the place? God damn it to hell. Mm-hmm. At least 35% of our spiritual community would be schizophrenic.
Yeah.
You got people in churches getting caught in the spirit.
That's right.
Beating tambourines.
Yep.
And then falling to the floor and so on. How do you explain this phenomena in respect? They're all schizophrenic, right? Does schizophrenia exist? Yes, I absolutely believe it does. What I call it schizophrenia, hell to the no. Mm-hmm. I think people call things into existence when they need it. And those things, the only difference between that definition of schizophrenia and what we term to be channeling is that in schizophrenia, you're saying that these people are making this shit up. Their minds are creating different personalities, yeah? But in the channeling community, no, I'm actually channeling somebody who is different from me. Now, here's why it gets hairy. You want to know the distinction that I would make in that scenario? If the person that is you are channeling is different from you, and the person knows and understands things that you do not understand and know your own self, then it cannot be you making shit up. You understand what I just said, Patti?
Yep, I do.
Okay? So now, if your memories are not yours, you could not have possibly been there. It's not you making shit up. Because you're not a historian, so you don't know the minute details of stuff. In the case of Miss Cleo, that would be channeling. That would be channeling.
Yeah.
So the way they're diagnosing this as schizophrenia is the following. She created a personality because she felt unsafe and that would be your tall one personality. Somebody who's big and powerful, etc., etc. She created the max personality because she wasn't sure about her sexuality. And so she created somebody who would allow her to experience different kinds of sensations and different kinds of experiences.
Mm-hmm.
And she created the mother type personality because she clearly did not have a mother. And the absence of a mother created a void in her. And so she created her own personality.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? All right. I have a teddy bear. I do. Love him to death. Had him for years. Right? I treat him like a real person.
Mm-hmm.
When it gets cold, he's underneath the covers with me. I live in Canada, it gets cold. I clearly have a problem that needs diagnosing. Do I really? How many psychologists have a teddy? Let me answer that. I went to school with a whole bunch of them. Okay. I went to school with a whole bunch of them. They're all in the closet. They're all in the closet teddy huggers. They are, right? So now they all have a problem because we're inventing things apparently that we need. Mm-hmm. So clearly I need what? Something to take care of. I need a pet. I don't know, whatever the case may be. Mm-hmm. And I may have a teddy. When you are utilizing psychological analysis, there is an arrogance that comes with it that tends to suggest that you're some sort of doctor of something. Mm-hmm. No, you're not. You're just theorizing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Unless you could get inside that person's head and see what they see and experience what they experience, you don't. Let me tell you how I know that Cleo's case is not a case of schizophrenia, okay? Mm. She is aware of the other personalities that exist.
Oh, yeah.
The other personalities that exist are doing things that are a complete 180 from her. Mm. And yes, you could make an argument. She needs those personalities. You could absolutely make the argument. But how do you ignore the fact that this lady is completely living in an alternate reality, but still grounded? She knows the rules of this society. Mm-hmm. That none of these personalities, right, are doing things which are illegal and so on. They know the basic rules of this reality. Mm-hmm. So no, she's not suffering from schizophrenia. She's experiencing other realities with people who are completely different from her. Mm-hmm. And you have to take this into consideration, apart from the glaring fact that you called her a psychic, when that is actually a small part of who she was. She was also a channel, clearly a voodoo priestess, a medicine woman, and a whole bunch of other things.
A shaman, a seer, a diviner. Yep, all of that.
Yeah, basically all the shamans in American Indian history, they definitely would have schizophrenia.
Yeah.
They were all channels, all of them.
Well, there's a story about a monk.
Oh, wait one second. Okay, I need to make this point.
Sure.
Every Christian revivalist preacher has schizophrenia, or every one of them. Prosperity preachers, well, I know they have a mental problem, for sure. You know, the prosperity preachers, they have the multi-million-dollar churches, and they tell you that they have the $65 million jet and so on. And I'm like, how are you different from a rapper on the streets? You have a personality crisis that you need to deal with. Mm-hmm. Okay? These are the things that you have to say about.
Yeah, yeah. And so I often have thought that psychology or a kind of like the path, I'm going to say it wrong, but basically the psychologization, I said that wrong, of spiritual and mystical experiences is a kind of form of control.
Because, it's also a form of silencing. You're crazy.
Absolutely. Up. You're crazy. Shut up. And that's what I mean. It's like a form of control. So again, along comes psychology, and anything outside what we would call the normal religious experience, like if it happens within the framework of the of the accepted religions, then we are going to accept that mystical experience. But outside of that, if you're hearing voices, if you're seeing visions, if there's a kind of channeling going on, then we have names for that in DSM. Like, we have names for that, and you should probably see somebody.
I read the DSM-5 and the DSM-4 extensively. If that is the case, then we have to look at, because a lot of these people also are Christian. So I'm going to go there because, hey, we're just hanging out, right, Patti?
Yeah.
And you know me already. So I am legion, for we are one and we are many. How are you going to accept that that is a spiritual experience happening? You take the freaking demons, you put them in the poor innocent pigs that were just minding their business, you drive them off the side of a cliff and you kill them. Yo, Legion had schizophrenia issues, right? Take him into a mental institution and put some drugs in him, right?
Well, there's this story that has circulated pretty wide and far. It's not really a story, but it's like the story of a monk who has traveled to America from the East, and visits an asylum and says, "Oh, so this is where you keep all your shaman here." So basically and there's so much in that statement that I think rings true, not only in the Cleo experience, but in general, in people like Cleo, in our culture.
If you meditate for 5 years extensively, okay, been meditating for a while, and you drink what psychology has to say to you, you would say that meditation has made you crazy, because who are the people that you're speaking to in meditation? There's parts of your mind, really? No.
Yeah.
The insight that you glean and so on, it's just parts of your mind. You gain insight that could not possibly be part of your knowledge spectrum. People who are meditators know this very well. People do speak to you, they do tell you things in meditation, and then you come out of meditation and you apply them and you find them to be the correct in premise and so on. So all these people who believe in guides and whatever else, as long as they're outside of you and you're talking to them, it's cool, right? But when they come inside of you and they interact in the real world, that's when you have to be afraid. But you're talking to things that do not exist, that other people can't interact with. They are your guides, they are your spirits and whatever else, whether you're into shamanism or whatever, they are your guides and so on. You come into contact with them. They're your spirits, they're your essences or whatever else that are there to. What about Christians and the guardian angels? The guardian angel came and told me to divorce my wife. A man told me that in my office once. Okay, and this is the kinds of things that you really have to wonder, but psychology has been used as a weapon a lot of the times.
Totally agree with you.
In the media, it's been used as a weapon. You're going to get the random expert psychologists on your show to say that Miss Cleo is mad.
Yeah.
Okay? Listen to me. The Milgram experiments and the Stanford experiments show you what that does. I'll explain to y'all who are watching the show what the Milgram experiments was. You set up a lab. Inside the lab, there's a man in a lab coat. The man in the lab coat comes to you and you come to the man in the lab coat. He says, inside this other room there, you can see there's a man. They move the screen and he's sitting in a chair and he's tied down. The man is going to be asked a bunch of questions.
I remember this.
The man is going to be asked a bunch of questions. When he answers them wrong, I'm going to indicate that you're supposed to press a button to give him an electrical shock. Are you willing to take part in the experiment? Yes, okay. Ask the first question, correct. Second question, wrong. Press the button, shock. There are a range of buttons. Go up another button, greater shock. Will you press it? Yes, press. He answered wrong. Go up a little bit more.
And in the meantime, the guy behind the curtain is screaming,
screaming.
starting to scream and
Say,
beg for them to
please,
stop.
he's saying, please let me out, let me out, let me out, please. The individual that is pressing the button
keeps going.
Is the cause, is the study.
Yep.
Because they wanted to find out how people respond to somebody in a lab coat, an expert, a doctor, telling them to do stuff, until eventually at the very end of that line, the last button, you hear the man collapsing. Right? You hear the man collapsing and he goes silent. Right? And you don't, presumably you should have killed that guy, right? With all the electrical charges and so on. The guy who's inside the room, who's being strapped down to a chair, is an actor.
Yes.
The point that was made in that experiment was that people will listen to an expert as long as the expert is presented as an expert.
Yep. We've seen that. So we've seen that to alarming degrees in the last 2 years.
Yeah, because experts on TV every once in a while telling you who to hate and who not to hate and who has a problem and who doesn't have a problem and so on. And nobody uses their critical thinking anymore because we have experts that are trained to do that. And Miss Cleo was a prime example of that kind of thing, because the politician is the authority figure who's telling you this woman is bad and he's going to go after her and so on. And then you have another politician who's going to tell you that we're going to build back better. And another one is telling you he's going to make America great again. And you have another one who's going to be telling you a whole bunch of other things. Right? And politicians say things and they have the little catchphrases, and you buy onto that because critical thinking is dead. Because politicians will keep saying things. And then you have authority figures in the news, like the doctors and so on, who tell you that this is the right course of action. And because they're wearing a lab coat, you follow it. And we have not come past the idea that every man I'm going to quote Bob Marley, getting back to Miss Cleo. Every man has a right to decide his own destiny. And in this judgment, there is no partiality. That is the beginning lines of one of the most famous songs of Bob Marley.
Cleo used to quote Bob Marley a lot. One of her favorites was "Free your mind from mental slavery." She said, you know, you really need to think about that line. That's an important line. Yeah. So, and a hungry man is an angry man.
Yes, a hungry man is an angry man. These are some very interesting words.
So, and she called Bob Marley a prophet and believes that he met
the exact words of Bob Marley in that song was, emancipate yourself from mental slavery. None but ourselves can free our minds.
That's right. Yep. So yeah, she believed he was a modern day prophet.
Absolutely. I believe it
and
too.
She said, and you see what we do to prophets, right?
We apparently execute all of them. Like a lot of people don't know what happened to the 12 apostles of Christ. The Bible just kind of, they were all executed and tortured, dismembered, flayed, impaled, all sorts of weird shit happened to them. So the point is, it doesn't pay to be a prophet. Okay? It doesn't pay to be, people eviscerate you in the social circles because you're speaking truth.
Yeah, and and this is true, and it goes back historically. So do you know, and a friend told me this, because I had this crazy dream once that I was on this old ship and I had been captured, and this man who looked like a Spanish conquistador was telling me that he was going to take my tongue. And I felt, the dream felt like, oh, this actually happened. I don't know when, but it actually happened. And I was telling a friend, and she said, they used to remove the tongues of prophets. And, and I thought about this relative to Cleo, so it's kind of like a modern day removal of one's tongue was basically what was one of the things that happened to her, was the removal of her tongue. And it's tragic. it's tragic. But getting back to the psychology part, when the folks with the documentary asked me, well, so how would you respond to people who say, you know, she was disturbed and these other, you know, voices, you know, these other
Would you like to know how
aspects.
I would respond?
Well, what I said, and your response is going to be very different from mine, but what I said was, what I said was that it really didn't matter to me, or it really doesn't matter to me whether they were an aspect of Cleo or a separate spirit who occupied her, because I loved them. I loved them. And so in a way, it doesn't matter what you say, I loved them. There was something endearing about them. I loved spending time with them. I felt like I learned, but they were the folks who traveled with her. And so it was like, meeting her family, you know.
Mm.
So what would you say? What would you say? I know it would be different from mine. So let's hear it.
I would say I am disturbed myself, actually, now that we're talking about it. Like, I actually consult my spirit guides, and they told me to tell you the following lines. They told me to tell you, emancipate yourself from mental slavery. None but ourselves can free our minds. Have no fear for atomic energy, because none of them can stop time.
Yeah.
How long shall we how long shall they kill our prophets while we stand aside and look? These are words.
I know.
These are I know every word of that song. Every word. It's embedded in me, and it was embedded in Cleo. So thank you, Patti, for actually having me on here.
Yeah.
Because I remember, if Miss Cleo was disturbed, you have a whole race of people in the Caribbean that are disturbed.
That's right.
We all speak to our spirit guides to one level or another. Some of us rather directly, some of us get possessed by it, and it's a natural way of life for a lot of people. So we're all disturbed, and we probably all need to be silenced and called as disturbed people.
Well, it's this way of living that where the physical world and the spiritual world, it's kind of a seamless kind of life, to be living this physical life and have our spirit life be a seamless part of it. That and I think that, like we talked about with the traditions out of Africa and the traditions in the Caribbean and around the world, that there are so many people around the world who still have their spirituality intact. It's still very, very much a part of their daily lives. And
in African law, in American Indian law, in the Caribbean law, spirit and this world, like a cycle, you have the ability as a multidimensional being to walk in both and same at the same time. You have that ability. People in the Western world used to believe in that. Only Europeans, listen, from the time they lock you into this world with this psychology nonsense.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to say that psychology by itself is nonsense. It's a valid form of study. But don't be locked into this idea of what sanity is, because it's very limiting.
Yes. And I actually...
Sanity can kill you one day.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think...
Actually, sanity is the reason for a lot of death in the United States, because if you were insane, then you would know you had an out. The reason why people commit suicide is because they have an out and they choose to get out of this life. So they don't want to exist anymore. The spirit world and the real world are intermixed with each other.
And even Martin Luther King, who was more traditional, had kind of a more traditional form of spirituality, was critical of how psychology related to people's spirits in general. And when he said, and this is, not going to, I don't have the exact quote, but it's something like, they have a word today, called maladjusted. And he went on to say, I'll never be adjusted to poverty and to war and to all of these things, that the hope for our world and for our country lies with the maladjusted. So in his own way, I think he was addressing this very problem. This has been an awesome conversation. I'm glad we were able to talk about the psychology of it, because I know that that's going to, I'm really interested to see how that's received when the documentary comes out this fall, because it is a little known thing about Cleo. And once again, I hope it gives us an opportunity again to examine our own ignorance in this area, and to look more critically at what psychology does.
Yeah. And this has been fun, actually, Patti.
Yeah.
We absolutely should do that again. I would like to see that documentary when it comes out. So please let me know when it's out.
Yes, I wish I don't know the name of it yet, but hopefully we'll be learning about that soon. I'm looking forward to it too. And we'll see. They've done a lot of filming, and we'll just kind of see what ends up on the edit floor and what ends up on the screen. You kind of know how that goes, right? I'm hoping for the best.
Yeah, I do.
I'm hoping that they're going to put out a compassionate and humane story. That's my hope for this project. Can you also let people know where they can find you and follow you and all of that?
Okay. You guys can follow me at info@universalcitizentv.com. And I'm David Ellis, and I look forward to hearing from you guys.
Yeah, awesome. So much fun as always, David. Been a lot of fun.
This is wonderful.
For more about my books and services, visit PattiLuciaWrites.com. Thanks for listening.